It is officially 2022. 2021 is over. It's a new year. It's a new time, and hopefully the only time for this channel is a new name change. I feel like Modernist Guide to Popular Media is too wordy, maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe this time will make a little bit more sense while still try to convey more of the channel than me, a person specifically. I've been like crazy sick and I still don't feel great, but I really want to get this out there and finally have this video done. So this is the top 10 my favorite films, more or less, in order of how great I think they are, both enjoyable and construction wise. After that, it's getting more into things that are going to start pouring out in 2022. Not doing any anticipation lists because just not there yet for that kind of research. It's all about consuming and seeing what makes it stick, right? From now on, this is Media Mentality, and this is the top 10 films of 2021. The number 10 best film of the year, I believe, is The French Dispatch, which is just Wes Anderson being as quirky and apathetically, empathetically ennui-ish and drab while being fab. It's all of those whimsical dictionary words that you can kind of throw the book at, with a huge cast and layers upon layers of very specific, super indie filmmaking storytelling that he's known for. He is a titan of his own personal industry, and it's just a really fun character and ensemble work. You know, if you like non-musical plays that are witty and somewhat cynical but still very vibrant in just the human social consciousness of how people interact with each other regardless of the situation or the time period, which it crosses multiple paths, then, you know, you'll love this as much as any other Wes Anderson movie you may have seen already. Number 9 is The Suicide Squad. James Gunn tries his best to make it as dumb comic booky as possible. It's just plastered with wacky humor and some kind of like, it's crude but not obscene. And I just enjoy how on purpose careless the whole film feels, because I think that chaotic energy that a lot of people love from comics is still missing in all comic films that have ever been made in the past 25-30 years, even way before MCU started, even back when it was just Blade and the original Spider-Man, stuff like that. The chaos, the just like day-to-day nonsense insanity of getting an issue out, I think comes through here, but hyper focus and in a really enjoyable, colorful way. All the characters are great. Even just the one-line deaths are just way more interesting than what they did with the first Suicide Squad by miles and miles and miles. This is the perfect tone for a slapstick murder comedy, basically, is what it is. And it's something I can give the WB-DC film pantheon a lot of props, as they do at least let people choose their tone. And James Gunn was perfect for this, and he hit it out of the park. Number 8 is Godzilla vs. Kong. I like wrestling.
This evening, man, do it! My God! My God! My God! A crossbody up the top! Suicide! Chase!
I think there's an interesting debate that will not be let go, and to not be super specific about it, maybe in an actual like essay video, because I want to start doing those. But there seems to be this eager desire to separate visual spectacle from the concept of filmmaking and cinema in general, and it's only really directed at one conscious choice of film label. But if there's anything of a visual spectacle that is also cinema, then, you know, if you want to be a film nerd or a historian or cinephile or whatever, the 1902 French film A Trip to the Moon was the first attempt at just doing the craziest shit that only film can do visually, that you couldn't even do on stage with practical effects at the time. And I know a lot of people resent CGI and want to call it fake for, you know, being unable to touch it so that its types of effects is not genuine enough. But I think in the world of how we look at video games as well, we're far surpassed that. And so Kong vs. Godzilla is, at this point right now, in this time, and it does suck that the CGI problem makes things look dated, but there's plenty of practical effects that do the same. Right now, there's a wrestling video game movie, and it is with the best effects that you can give. It has beautiful, colorful neon backgrounds, and they're just smashing around being dumb wrestling idiots. It is peak 90s WWF Attitude Era wrestling nonsense with just random, mostly likable human characters. I would actually like it if it was just more bashing and crashing of just the CGI monsters. And I understand the resentment that some people feel about that, but I don't care, because there has to be a point where you need to know the difference between what Godzilla vs. Kong is trying to accomplish and something like any kind of Star Wars movie or hyper sci-fi that fails to impress fail to do. It's just like that. From that perspective, to me, Godzilla vs. Kong actually knocks it out of the park, and it's wonderful. And it didn't have to be a full animated wrestling monster movie, which actually exists on Paramount, and it looks awful and cheap. And that is not the same thing. So number 7 is actually 2 films, but they're only like, I think, an hour and a half apiece, and they mirror each other a lot. That is Bo Burnham's Inside and Tick Tick Boom. They're both technically musicals, but they're also, very interestingly enough, from 2 separate time periods about existential crisis of reaching the middle age point in your life and being afraid of having done nothing correct with your life, no matter what you've actually accomplished, no matter what people believe in you or not. It's literally both Andrew Garfield portraying Jonathan Larson, the creator of Rent, and Bo Burnham himself are terrified of turning 30 and doing nothing but writing songs of how fucked up the world is and how scared they are to continue in it and not contribute anything but being white. And so you could watch either or back to back, but I think they're an amazing mirroردom of a script and play that was written back in like 1993 and hasn't really changed that much. It just happens to be filmed now, and everything Bo Burnham did during the COVID lockdown just last year in 2020. Number 6 is Judas and the Black Messiah. For me, every year there needs to be at least one really good All the President's Men level political intrigue, scary, this really happened and we should really think about it dramatization of history in general, but it's always American history because it's American films and that's what Hollywood's obsessed with. One day I'll find one by a foreign director, a foreign company and all that, even in a different language that grips me as much as something like All the President's Men or The Zodiac or any other realistic political thriller that you could name. That, again, every year there's at least one of them. And Judas and the Black Messiah is this one because it really shines a light on something that needed a light shown on it years ago, and that is our corrupt government system. Every time any kind of radicalized force, especially a non-white, non-straight one, wants to attack and keep down and hold down. There's so many conspiracies about how crack cocaine flourished in America and how the AIDS virus spread the way it did in America in the 80s and all these things. And this one's very clearly is something that you can't argue, but this is something that, you know, even radical right-leaning alt-right people want to say, you know, didn't happen or needed to happen. That was the FBI, a government branch, just killed a black man. But because Fred Hampton was such a higher ranking official in the Black Panther Party, they believed that it was just easier to just kill him. And we are facing that insanely today still with Black Lives Matter movement, no matter what anyone wants to say about it that's true or not. It's the same thing of black people wanting to rise up and defend themselves, and at least in the 60s and 70s they clearly got away with it more. It's amazingly acted, and the moment that you're really basically waiting the whole film for as you learn these people and appreciate them and like them for who they are, when it comes, it just hits really hard and it's intense and amazing. I think it's one of the best political thrillers in years. Number 5 is Spider-Man No Way Home. No Way Home's honestly an interesting entry. I think it's really good and it's well written and it's wonderfully acted. It's a lot of fun and it's action-packed, but it's the culmination of giving a shit about these movies far beyond before the acquisition of Disney. And it is a 20-year celebration of Spider-Man, more or less. And either you love it or you hate it in that context, because in one degree, it is wonderful seeing the three actors together that way, that just chronicling the generation of Spider-Man on film. But it's another thing to, also realize that even with trying their hardest not to tell anybody, it was still, in a way, its own marketing ploy. And it's hard to separate that in a way where you still want to enjoy these films sometimes. Like, yes, maybe it is just a marketing situation and it made a shit ton of money at what a lot of people are desperately going to feel is like the end of the pandemic, even though it's not. But one thing that I refuse to let anyone take away from the Marvel movies in general, regardless of what Disney has or has not done to make them better or worse, is the characterization. So these characters, I think, in comics in general, because there's so much source material, it's easy to create very likable and enjoyable characters. Characterization more than anything else. And the acting is superb. Fuck it, seriously, give William Dafoe an Oscar nomination. Give William Dafoe an Oscar nomination. The Oscars are stupid and useless anyways. It's not going to matter. They're not going to let him win, but he should have a nomination because he is one of the best film villains ever. And it doesn't matter that it comes from a superhero movie. If he was, a Terminator, people would clamor for it. Or if he was, and just because he flies around and blows shit up doesn't mean he wouldn't fit in a gangster film. But I think this film, more than any of the other Spider-Man films in any canon, kind of straddles that line of well acted, well put together, super well done characterization, storytelling, and, loud, flashy, explodey spectacle. So it's probably one of the best MCU films, and I understand the bar is pretty low for that, but that's the thing about MCU films in general, is they're at their best when you have all these characters to bounce off each other. Just like most comics, usually, if you're not going to go the grounded route like they did with the Netflix Marvel stuff, and even then, that didn't always work. Number 4 is Dune, and the hard reality about Dune is that I don't know how I'm going to completely feel about this film till I see the second one. It's just Lord of the Rings Fellowship in space, but a little more drawn out, and they actually kind of don't start their journey till the end. So it's a weird thing because I've watched the Lord of the Rings series together so much that they feel like one film. One doesn't feel complete without the other. The idea of picking one of the three as a better film than the others is kind of difficult for me ultimately. I think it's actually Twin Towers, but I really love the final one because it's so action-packed and all the catharsis there. And the same thing here is that it's building to something great. And that build is wonderful and it's a great feeling, but it's like how I feel about the first 30 minutes of Mad Max Fury Road, or the first 2 hours minus the conclusion of Blade Runner 2049. That's the feeling and scope I get, but there's not a conclusion, so it's really rough. But it's this high because of how good it makes me feel in anticipation for the next part, which thankfully at least is greenlit. All right, number 3 is the absolute most divisive, I think, and most polarizing film on this list. It's going to be, that's Matrix Resurrections. Point blank, if you don't like Reloaded and Revolutions, then you're not going to like Resurrections. It's that simple. It's weird how more complicated and how like false narrative and bad faith a lot of people want to be about this movie being a cash grab sequel and not understanding how it was made. I think understanding how a film is made is really important, and I really want to make a much longer focused video on the Matrix franchise as a whole, and that's probably coming up next after this video. So that's really where I'm going to focus talking about it. But I think Lana Wachowski does a great job of taking her series back to her while still making a love letter to who she believes are actual fans of the entire Matrix franchise. If you're just a fan of the first Matrix, go ahead and just keep that. It doesn't really matter what you think of this one or anything as a whole if you're only going to like 1/4 of a concept. And something I want to dig into about the concept of sequels and franchises is that if you only like 1/4 of it, then there's no point in getting mad at the other 3/4. You know, keep your Matrix 1 in your box. It's fine. But it's a wonderful return to form, and more than anything, I think because of the landscape that the first Matrix film, more than anything, did shape around pop culture and around these types of films and the film series itself. Lana just wanted to make a happy ending, and she did. And it's a huge, loving, very entertaining, and very well made epilogue to the series. And I don't think they're going to do another one. But if they do, I think Lana is so smart enough to figure it out again like she did here, because she took a bad situation and she made it great. Number 2, best film of the year, I think is actually like the best film of the year, but it's number 2 because I don't get as much joy out of rewatching it as I do number 1, which I don't think is a detriment. It's more like tying 2 and 1 together. But anyways, it's Pig. If you've never heard of Pig, just go watch Pig like right now. It's Nicolas Cage in a wonderful subvert of the concept of a revenge film. Like, you could just watch the trailer and it feels like it's going to be very John Wickian. And I don't want to go into a lot of details because there's a Twister 3 that you're not really going to suspect except me telling you, so maybe, you'll figure it out from there. But the thing that makes this so amazing, so wonderful, is that it is about loss and suffering, but while it is shot like an action film and it is choreographed and framed as an action film, and there's so many tropes of you feeling it build and build like a John Wick movie, it doesn't do anything that John Wick does. It's fascinating to watch. I want more low budget independent films like this, because this is amazing to take a non-action film and shoot it like an action film. It, is when you take an action film and you actually frame it like a satire or a political commentary and you mix those things together. I've never seen a blend like this before, and it makes Pig just so good and fun to watch when you understand action tropes and how they're subverted. And this is actual subversion, not I predicted wrong so it tried to trick me subversion. This is actual technical film subversion, and I have not seen one much better than this. That's so sleek without it hitting you over the head of, see what we're doing? Can you figure out how we're doing it this way? It doesn't do that at all. And it is amazing, and you should watch Pig. And finally, my number 1 film, I feel like I have to preface, is if you're just tired of franchises and spin-offs and you want something familiar but it's still a new idea and a new brand, because there's this horrible mix of being upset at sequels and not getting original material, but when you get something original that's not based on anything and people say it's generic, it's like, what are you looking for? But here, Space Sweepers, which is a Korean sci-fi action film that you can find anything from. If you hated all the Star Wars sequels, or half of them or whatever, or if Valerian of 1,000 Planets disappointed you like it did me like 5 years ago, there's not been a just rompous, ruckus filled sci-fi adventure that has just made you happy to enjoy good characters and a whole lot of heart, and a progressive message of control is bad, because as we all like to talk about being smart, that that the dark side is just stormtrooper Nazi stuff, and it's a kids movie, but it's still about how political intrigue and all this is there. It's got that a little bit too. It's got a little bit of Wally in there. It is anti-capitalist, probably, to the most part. The bad guy is a billionaire in space, very Elon Musk-esque, but the characters are so fun. If you love Cowboy Bebop the anime and you fucking hated the Cowboy Bebop live action, then watch this, because this is like if completely unaffiliated they did do a Cowboy Bebop live action movie, but it has nothing to do with that. It's just comparing. But seriously, if you're tired of franchises being remade but you still want just a fucking wonderful, like the joy of filmmaking sci-fi romp, then Space Sweepers is just all I could like push to you, especially because just Korean cinema is so eager to just make things like this. They, Train to Busan is a huge favorite of mine as well. Bong Joon-ho is quickly became one of my favorite directors, and he's a little darker, but I just Space Sweepers is so great. It's on Netflix, but it's only as a distribution if you're in America. It's not like Netflix had their hand in it, I think, at all. And I cannot stress enough. I'm trying to think of like all the other sci-fi stuff, like The Expanse is huge right now. If you love that, you love Space Sweepers. It's that kind of thing that more than anything that I want to make this channel for is maybe you weren't interested in something because you weren't sure if you'd like it. Lost in Space, that's another one. But just watch Space Sweepers if you haven't, because it's so good and it just has so much heart to it. That's the thing. What I thought was missing from specifically Valerian and Thousand Planets, that was such a disappointing film for me. It took too long to get somewhere. The acting was kind of like over seriously. With these guys, they're just fun ragtag group of doofuses, and they're just kind of badass. And I just love Space Sweepers is what I think of when I want to go see a fun movie that makes me happy that I'm watching the thing in front of me. I think a lot of people think about that joy in a lot of Spielberg films, and all the 90s stuff that we were getting, first wonderment of Jurassic Park and all those things. I really love this film. It is absolutely my favorite of 2021, and hopefully you have found something on this list that you were skeptical about or didn't know existed, and you're going to check it out. But that's it for this episode, the first episode 2022, the first episode of Media Mentality. But from here on out, it's just consume and make better the best you can, because that's all there is to it. That's the Media Mentality. Like, share, subscribe if you want. And as always, thank you for listening, and have a great night.